Chapter 10: Why Responsibility Cannot Be Delegated Away. Responsibility is often treated as transferable. Tasks are delegated. Authority is assigned. Accountability is distributed. Structures are created to ensure that decisions can be made without overburdening any single actor. Delegation is necessary. But responsibility is not the same as task ownership. This chapter examines the distinction and why systems fail when they confuse the two. The convenience of delegation. Delegation reduces load. It allows systems to scale by distributing effort across roles, departments, and layers. It enables specialization. It improves efficiency. Delegation is a functional necessity. The error arises when delegation is assumed to transfer responsibility rather than execution. Execution can be delegated. Responsibility cannot. This distinction is often blurred intentionally. Responsibility as exposure to consequence. Responsibility is not defined by role or title. It is defined by exposure. Those who bear the consequences of the decision are responsible for it, regardless of who executed the task. Responsibility attaches to outcome, not instruction. Systems that misunderstand this detach decision-making from consequence. Authority issues directives while responsibility dissipates across layers. The result is predictable. Decisions become bolder. Correction becomes slower. Accountability becomes symbolic. Why responsibility is actively avoided. Responsibility concentrates risk. It limits plausible deniability. It exposes judgment to consequence. It requires accepting outcomes beyond intention. As systems grow, this exposure becomes uncomfortable. Delegation becomes a defensive mechanism rather than a functional one. Responsibility is diluted through committees, processes, and procedures. Decisions are reframed as collective outcomes. No individual appears responsible. This diffusion feels protective. It is destabilizing. The illusion of distributed accountability. Distributed accountability appears fair. It suggests shared ownership and collective effort. It prevents concentration of blame. It aligns with collaborative ideals. Structurally, it often produces the opposite. When accountability is distributed without clarity, responsibility is owned by no one. Feedback weakens. Learning slows. Correction is postponed. Systems drift because no component is structurally required to absorb consequence. Authority without responsibility. One of the most destabilizing configurations is authority without responsibility. Decisions are made by actors insulated from impact. Execution is carried out by those without authority to alter direction. Consequence is absorbed by those with neither. This configuration produces compliance without coherence. The system functions. It does not adapt. Over time, misalignment accumulates. Responsibility and the boundary of control. Responsibility defines the boundary of control. A system can only control what it is willing to be responsible for. Attempts to control beyond responsibility produce fragility. Enforcement replaces adaptation. Control expands while ownership shrinks. This imbalance creates tension. Systems that attempt to control outcomes they refuse to own inevitably encounter resistance, internal or external. Why responsibility cannot be outsourced. Outsourcing is often treated as risk reduction. Execution is transferred to external actors. Liability is shifted contractually. Complexity is abstracted. Responsibility remains. Outcomes still affect the system's integrity, legitimacy, and capacity. External actors cannot absorb consequence on behalf of the system's identity. Responsibility attaches to impact, not arrangement. Outsourcing delays feedback. It does not remove exposure. The procedural mask. Procedures are often used to mask responsibility. When outcomes are challenged, systems point to process compliance. Rules were followed. Protocols were observed. Decisions were authorized. Procedural correctness becomes a substitute for responsibility. This substitution is fragile. Procedures do not absorb consequence. They document it. Systems that rely on procedure to deflect responsibility accumulate unknown impact. Correction arrives regardless. Responsibility in learning. Learning requires ownership. Systems learn when outcomes are connected to decisions. When feedback reaches the actors capable of altering configuration. When consequence informs future action. When responsibility is deflected, learning stalls. Mistakes repeat. Adjustments are cosmetic. Patterns persist under new labels. The system appears busy. It does not become wiser. When this is ignored. When responsibility is delegated away, systems experience repeated failure without apparent cause. Decisions seem reasonable. Execution appears competent. Outcomes remain unstable. The gap lies not in performance, but in ownership. Correction becomes increasingly external. The comfort of process over judgment. Judgment is uncomfortable. It requires uncertainty. It exposes decision makers to error. It demands adaptation. Process is comforting. It offers predictability. It reduces discretion. It shields individuals from exposure. Systems gravitate toward process when responsibility feels heavy. The shift trades adaptability for safety. Eventually, safety erodes. Responsibility and trust. Trust depends on visible ownership. When responsibility is clearly held, trust develops even when outcomes are imperfect. When responsibility is diffused, trust erodes even when outcomes appear successful. People sense when no one is accountable. This erosion is subtle but cumulative. Trust does not fail loudly. It thins quietly. Delegation versus abdication. Delegation supports responsibility. Abdication avoids it. The difference lies in oversight and exposure. Delegation retains accountability. Abdication transfers blame. Systems that abdicate responsibility become reactive. They manage optics rather than outcomes. They address symptoms rather than configuration. This behavior accelerates misalignment. The irreversibility of unknown decisions. Some decisions cannot be undone. When responsibility is unclear, irreversible outcomes occur without ownership. Correction becomes impossible. Blame circulates without resolution. The system absorbs damage without learning. This condition is often described as tragedy. It is structural. Responsibility at scale. As systems scale, responsibility must become more explicit, not less. Scale increases impact. Impact increases exposure. Exposure demands clarity. Many systems respond to scale by adding layers that obscure responsibility. This response feels organized. It is dangerous. Scale without responsibility magnifies consequence. Why responsibility is the last line of defense. Responsibility is the final internal mechanism before external enforcement. When systems accept responsibility, they correct internally. When they refuse it, correction arrives from outside. This transition is predictable. Responsibility is not an ethical luxury. It is a structural necessity. Closing constitutional statement. Tasks can be delegated. Authority can be assigned. Processes can be followed. Responsibility cannot be transferred. When systems attempt to delegate responsibility away, consequence returns it with interest. Ownership is not optional. It is unavoidable. End of chapter 10.